Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whisky podcast. I'm joined today by a man who spent 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month. The world really doesn't know because he couldn't tell us, but he spent an extended period of time in America's wilderness cleaning up America. Jason Neal, Patrick Harris Johnson Yellen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a good intro. I like that one a lot.
Oh, thank you.
America's wilderness, cleaning up America.
America's
like
wilderness,
that.
Right?
Gosh, I could have that in a business card.
You're making America clean again, which is nice.
I am. I'm trying to make America hike again.
Ah, there you go. Maha.
Which is always a double-edged sword, right? Like, we want more people hiking, but when we're out hiking, we don't really want to see other people. Like, let's be honest about this.
Yeah.
We want to enjoy America's wilderness to ourselves.
That's a good point, right? You're hiking, whether you're by yourself or you're with your kids or a friend, and inevitably you see that couple come towards you, and internally you're like, fuck, I got to say hi to them. I have to ask how they're doing. They're going to say, pretty good, how are you? I'll say, pretty good, thanks, and then you move on. And it's all scripted.
It's going to be very hollow. We're going to experience nature together, but it's going to be very hollow.
Very hollow, very surface.
We're all going to be waiting for this to be over and just thinking, oh, how long till they pass and they're not in my photos. I tell you this, we had a couple of nights at the trailhead this year because we were clearing 9 miles to get to camp. Right. So we had a little bit of work on our hands. Mm-hmm. And SCN Ardnamurchan got poured both nights. And then our very dear friend Bertie from Moscow, Idaho, took a flask of SCN Ardnamurchan into the wilderness as well. So we drank a lot of SCN Ardnamurchan together. And people are saying exactly what you expect people to be saying, right? Yeah. Where have Ardnamurchan come from? How are they this good, this quickly? Yeah. Why is this a delicious dram? At what age? I don't have a bottle in front of me. 5 years, 6 years? What did we bottle?
Yes, 5 years. Yep.
Right. Why is this so good so fast? So, yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it. Absolutely fit the surroundings beautifully. Yeah. So
there you go.
Drank a lot of other things as well. I made a little wilderness blend for dear friend Moscow Jim. Okay. And Craigellachie, Croftingea, and unnamed Glenmorangie were all in the mix. That's
got to be interesting. So the Craigellachie that you poured, was it the 67.6% rocket fuel that we did, or was it another?
It was all made from cask samples that we had that had never seen the light of day.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it was pretty tasty. It was 50% Craigellachie. It must have been maybe 35% unnamed Glenmorangie, and then 15% Crofty. Just that little Highland bit of structure to it.
I bet you just that 15% really popped.
It did.
It did. Yeah, there you go.
It did, yeah. No, very happy. Moscow Jim liked it. That was the important thing. Moscow Jim enjoyed drinking that in the wilderness. Mm-hmm. He took care of... There was one night he cooked for 20 people in the wilderness.
Oh, my
gosh. I'll be honest. I enjoy cooking. I enjoy being in my kitchen. I struggle to cook for 20 people in my house. And Moscow Jim at 75 years of age cooked for 20 people in the wilderness. And not just one night, multiple nights.
So, did he just bring Pop-Tarts for everybody? Was that the...
You get a Pop-Tart. You get a Pop-Tart. You can't spell Pop-Tart without popcorn. Hey, I got popcorn too. He was... Yeah, gosh, there was a lot of food being prepared. A lot of food. Very so, nice. Kudos there. Yeah, it was really wonderful. Thoroughly enjoyed myself. The Selway Bitterroot is a little bit tidier for me having been in it.
There you go. And Kai went with you?
He did. 2 weeks this time. I actually came home and came back to work, and he stayed in the wilderness, the lucky son of a gun.
Amazing.
The day we're recording here, I just picked him up this morning Woke up at 4:30 a.m., left the house by 5, picked him up by 7, home by 9. Just your classic 4-hour round trip airport pickup.
So what you're saying is you're kind of tired right now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let me do this. Let me give you a slight break from talking while you stretch. Maybe you charge your glass so we can talk about something after our the interview that we're going to be highlighting in today's episode. I wanted to bring an email up at the front end of this podcast, as has been our tradition. Well, I don't know, at least for season 8. I feel as if we kind of said, you know what, screw it, let's front load these emails. So, So we got an email from Tom Jodelka, which I know you know that name.
Know the name very well. Yep. Hello, Tom.
And I was meant to read this, I think, for our last recording, and then something happened. I think maybe I saw a shiny cord or a squirrel, probably a squirrel. I think that's what I saw.
Don't mention the squirrels.
And so actually his email was initially just, checking in on an order and, pairing up some shipments together, that sort of stuff. But he has a postscript. Which is also known as a PS.
Indeed.
And it says, P.S. I debated sending a separate email about this last week, but I wanted to recognize both of you for your interview/chat with fellow Nation member Ford on the latest episode of One Nation Under Whisky, which of course is
nice.
It's not the latest episode anymore, but
no, not anymore.
I was impressed with the amount of time that you spoke with him and also the manner in which you interacted with him. You treated him just like any other guest on the podcast. This was not simply a, quote, token gesture. He may as well have been a master distiller. I think that speaks volumes about your character and also how much you value the members of the nation. I'm proud to support Single Cask Nation, not just because you have excellent products, but because, more importantly, you are genuinely good people. Cheers to you all.
Well, there you go. That was worth coming out of the wilderness for. Right? That was tickety-boo. Thank you, Tom. And, if I can very quickly throw on top of that paragraph there, he talks about the measure of you and me. I think it also speaks to the measure of Ford Ray. Like, Ford's a terrific bloke and incredibly knowledgeable.
Yes.
And has a knowledge of American production, American whiskey, stretching back to post-prohibition. So Ford is a very easy person to sit and talk to and listen to and learn from. So I think we were three birds of a feather in that instance.
There you go. Yeah, you're 100% correct. B, I almost didn't bring this up because it felt like a private,
indulgent.
Yeah, it felt a little indulgent, but I wanted to make sure everybody heard us patting ourselves on the back. No, it seemed like a really special thing for him to write, and I said, hey, I think I may want to read this on the podcast. Are you cool with that? And he was very cool with it. So, thank you again, Tom, for putting those words out. It really means a lot.
Yeah, and I'm glad Ford worked as a guest host as well. That was up for grabs in the last Giving Tuesday, and went to Ford and worked out terrifically. So, as we did on that episode, we do again. We thank Ford for helping us pull that off and having it sound as good as it did. And I love hearing from Tom that it did sound good and it did work. So, cheers.
There you
cheers,
go.
cheers, cheers.
Cheers indeed. We have a little more time before we have to bring in our guests. There was one more email I wanted to bring up, if that was okay with you.
If it's a short one.
It's It's a good size.
Not every day Joshua gets to say that.
This one is from Dan Greisen.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And the subject reads, "A thought inspired by the ice cream man." Which everybody knows is Chris Hagen, Chris Hagen-Dazs, the ice cream man. He says, "Hello to all. Having just received your latest releases from Westland and Balcones and adding them to my growing collection of American single malts, I got to thinking about how my affinity for American single malt started. Fun fact, the first American single malt I ever had was Balcones, and this was long before I knew American single malt was a thing, going back probably to 2013 or 14, I would guess. I distinctly remember being wowed by the spirit, and that experience helped open the door for me to other ASM distilleries. ASM, of course, American Single Malt. I openly accepted brands like Westland at tastings and sought out other ASM producers, thanks in great part to my positive experience with Balcones. So I know why I am so eager to support ASM, but as the ice cream man had questioned, why isn't the growth happening more quickly? With that in mind...
I was just having this conversation with somebody on Friday.
Hey, there you go. With that in mind, my thought/question requires a bit of framing. I realize the American public has a true love affair with bourbon and rye, myself included. I also recognize there's a reluctance from the bourbon and rye crowd to try and accept new things, specifically any type of single malt. I was excited a few years ago when some of the major American players, Jack Daniel's and Jim Beam, to name a few, started putting out single malts, thinking this could open the door for the typical American whiskey consumer. Perhaps they would find it a bit more acceptable and be more willing to try ASM if it was coming from a producer they knew and trusted. However, I'm fairly comfortable saying most offerings from the big distilleries have fallen short of what I would consider a quality American single malt, and certainly not the best representation of what is being put out by those who focus more significantly on American single malt. So my question is this. Do you think the offerings from the major brands have helped or hindered the growth of the category? Sure, the ones we all know and love, Balcones, Westland, Westwards, Copperworks, VDC. Consider this my incomplete Dan Greisen list. Continue to put out great stuff and are doing well, but could they be reaching a bigger audience and be growing more quickly? Are bourbon drinkers grabbing a bottle of the Beam single malt, trying it and saying, nope, not for me, and giving up on the category? Just a thought I'll be pondering as I crack open my new SCN Westland. Hope you're all doing well. P.S. It was great seeing you in Chicago, Joshua. Thanks for sharing some amazing drams. He was at the Nolan's house, which was
wonderful.
A nice little treat.
Wonderful. I think the answer to Dan's question, and that's an excellent email. I think the answer to the question is both. I think it's both helping and hindering.
Yeah.
And I think one side of that is exactly what he points out. If the only American single malt you have is Jack Daniel's or Jim Beam, you may not continue on into the category. I have not had the Jack Daniel's or the Jim Beam. Samples have been promised, not by you, Joshua, but I haven't received them yet. And I share the same concern. If you go through duty free somewhere in the world and they're pouring one of the big players single malts, American single malt, and you go, oh no, that category's dead.
Yeah.
To you. On the other side, I often wonder if all news is useful news, right? No such thing as bad press, right? If someone, same person going through global duty free somewhere in the world, says, wait, American single malt? What's American single malt? Right? Mm-hmm. Maybe the big player doesn't hit a home run for them, but maybe a category has been brought to their attention that they hadn't heard before. Mm-hmm. Perhaps they continue to seek it out. Perhaps they go and discover someone like Balcones or a Westland, and maybe then they fall in love with the category. So I'm trying to be a more positive force in answering this question.
If we look at it from the standpoint of independent bottlers and the fact that there are a number, and I'm focusing more on the Scotch whiskey side of things, right? There are a number of distilleries that are increasingly removing a bottler's ability to use that distillery's name. And the reason quite often you're told is either A, they can offer up no-named liquid for a slightly better price, or B, if they have their own brand already, they want to protect that brand, because if a cask that wasn't so great got into the hands of a bottler who just wanted to bottle a Macallan because he got a Macallan, but it wasn't a great cask, it tarnishes the name. Mm-hmm. So, like, I see your point, but I can see it too from the perspective of that distillery who's hesitant to allow bottlers to use the name because they don't want their brand to be tarnished. So, like you, I haven't had the Jack Daniel's single malt. I haven't had the Jim Beam single malt. I think Bullet may have done a single malt as well. I don't know who they're sourcing that from. But I can understand Dan's point here about, what does... And again, I haven't had it, so I can't say if it's good, bad, or ho-hum. But if it's bad or ho-hum, that's not doing such a great thing for the category itself.
A quick word on that. We're sitting here talking as if this category exists. We're now into our second summer of not having resolution from the TTB on this category. That would be the place where having a Jack Daniel's, having a Jim Beam, having a Bullet, having their hats in the ring shows you that this is a real category that should be on the books, should be ratified by the TTB. So again, right, maybe the big ones can do some street fighting for you, get that category recognized. Yeah. I also think, and I quite like the point you're trying to make here, which is this: just like one might protect a distillery or brand name, one might want to protect a category.
Correct, yeah.
However, you and I know, and so do our listeners, there are a ton of excellent bourbons out there. There's also a ton of pretty average bourbons out there.
Very true.
And do those average bourbons crash the category? No, because the strong bourbons are so strong. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Same is true for rye. Same is true for mezcal. Mm-hmm. Same may be true for Scotch, but I think the bottom is a lot higher in Scotch. He said with tongue firmly planted in cheek. And so I think you do. A, we need to get the category ratified, and then B, we need the strength of the category to represent what can be done with American single malt, so that there is room for less stellar entries. And at this point, there are approximately 200 single malts, American single malts, being released in America.
Wow.
So
there you go.
There's a ton out there, and we have the incomplete Dan Gryson list. We also have the incomplete Jason and Joshua lists. And then we have the attention going to some of the bigger players here. There's a lot of American single malt to be discovered while we're awaiting the ratification of the category.
Yep, I think that's good. I think the path to this being a category, both recognized by the TTB and by the American public, and then the worldwide whiskey drinking public writ large. It's not going to be a linear one. That's for certain. But I think it's going to be fun either way to watch. And I think you're right. I think once this becomes ratified, the path will be a bit more clear and more people will jump into the fold and hopefully lift the others. And who knows? I think some of these larger brands put forth younger liquid that maybe needed a bit more time. If they had listed it similar to, say, like a Glengyle, Kilkerran, work in progress bottling that shows they're getting to something. Anyway, we could likely talk about this for another 10 to 20 minutes, but we don't have 10 to 20 minutes because we've got to bring in our conversation with you, Devin, and Chase.
That is correct. Yes, I sat down with the chaps from American Mash and Grain. This is, as we alluded to in the last episode, this is my last solo interview from my Austin, Texas trip. I was just thinking, looking at the One Nation Under Whiskey planning calendar, the next episode will be a solo Jason interview as well. So, Joshua and Jess, get those solo interviews rolling in. So, have you both been sending your files to questions@onenationunderwhiskey.com because they haven't been received?
I have at least one conversation scheduled. I had another conversation that was fully recorded by 2 of 3 people. So we're rescheduling that conversation. Yes, I your efforts to bring in the conversations have not gone unnoticed. We thank you, the team here thanks you, and we will get to recording more ourselves.
I'm both cleaning America and cleaning up the One Nation Under Whiskey interview schedule. So. And so, yes, in Austin, I got to sit down with Devin and Chase, a couple of very interesting chaps, both of them in a position where they're still in their day jobs, one squarely in whiskey, one not, but in an area that I am very passionate about, and I was very excited talking to him off the record about Scottish Rugby's impending trip to Washington, D.C. They were in D.C. while I was in the wilderness. So July 12, I missed the Scottish Rugby team in D.C.
Oh, man. Right
Curse
around
the
the corner.
heavens. Yeah. Scotland won against US Rugby, but we'll leave it at that. And so sitting down, talking to the 2 chaps, listening to chaps who are passionate about the distillers with whom they work, passionate about the blending practices that they're putting in place, passionate about tasting, blending, flavors. Again, right, as has been true for all of my Austin interviews, we were sitting having this conversation right around the time James Saxon of Compass Box was in Austin and on the Wizard Academy campus. Mm-hmm. And so, just wonderful to be having these types of conversations when I'm always thinking about our most recent conversation with James that we got on wax and released earlier in season 8. So, playing around with similar concepts in there. I do have a word to say about the Chapsies' second release, but I'll circle back once we come out the interview with them. Okay. I'll let the listeners get on over there. And so here comes Devin and Chase of American Mash and Grain. Cheers. Sitting here at the Wizard Academy, just outside Austin, Texas, with Chase and Devin from America's Mash and Grain. And you have a bottling series, Borrowed Page. I'm telling you things you know.
That is correct. We can confirm.
Tell us a little bit about yourselves. Frame this for us. Where were you before this? How did the inspiration for this come about?
Well, the story really starts in a small private school in Princeton, New Jersey in 1993.
We're going old school here.
Chase and I met on the second day of kindergarten.
Whoa.
He had been at the school for half of a year, and I was new. So naturally, I found the biggest kid in the school and decided I was going to try to take him down. Prison rules. We got into some sort of a skirmish in line going out to recess, which got us in trouble at our school. When you got in trouble, you got benched.
Oh, right.
That means that
Very
you had to sit on a bench that faced the playground, so you could watch all the other kids play.
This is psychological.
Oh yeah, we went to the school for the rest of our pre-college career, so we're pretty psychologically deranged at this point.
You've been taught by the best.
But yeah, so on that bench, we formed a deep friendship around our mutual love of Power Rangers and apple juice. Our love of beverages has continued. But no, so Chase and I have been lifelong friends. We've worked in a variety of different fields. I worked in film and television in New York City for 13 years. Chase has kind of bounced around the sports scene. I'll let him do a little bit more of his personal resume. But, we started American Mash and Grain during the pandemic. At that point, I had worked for a couple small whiskey distilleries in Pittsburgh and in Brooklyn, New York, and was kind of considering a career change, and then the world shut down. Mm-hmm. So trying to figure out how to keep the progress that I had started moving in a world where you really couldn't do anything.
Sure.
And that's when Chase had the idea. So I'll hand this over to Chase. He can fill in his background gaps and take it from there.
I mean, we already covered my kindergarten experience. I don't know how much more background you really need. So I work primarily in the sport marketing and commercial industry, really brand storytelling through sports. And so when the pandemic hit and Devin was kind of, feeling like his progression into the craft spirits space had taken a pause or kind of run into a roadblock, I had this great idea. I was like, well, I got loads of time on my hand. I like whiskey, and I would like to Zoom call with my friend periodically and drink some whiskey.
Nice.
So I was like, let's launch a blog website where we interview craft producers across the country and really kind of tell their story, like holistically, not just about the juice in the bottle, but and the yeast and the entry proofs and all that stuff, but also why are they doing it? What sacrifices they make along the way? What is that motivation that kind of keeps them going? What is the purpose or the story they're trying to tell with their spirits? And really, tell holistic stories around these producers. And through the course of doing that, really became super inspired. Which I think is kind of an inevitable outcome. I mean, you have a podcast talking to producers. I'd imagine you can relate to this. And so we go down in this journey of really just storytelling for a couple of years, and had this itch of we also kind of want to tell our own story and kind of work with these producers to bring a new perspective and actually release a product of our own. And that's where the idea of Borrowed Page came about, which is we work with some of the independent producers that we've featured on our website. So people we have already have existing relationships with, people we've already endeavored to know and share the story of, because we think that's so important to both Borrowed Page but also craft spirits more broadly. And so we work with people from our website. We source some whiskey from them and then blend it into an American blended whiskey. So purposefully not a bourbon, not a single malt, not a rye. And we've now released 2 releases, Volume 1 and Volume 2, and they're dramatically different. That's again, we want this kind of journey of Borrowed Page to be this never-ending pursuit of new flavor profiles, new stories, representative of producers from every corner of the country. And that's the journey we've been on with Borrowed Page.
So regular listeners know about the inevitable Jason follow-up questions here. And I actually want to go back a little bit into the blogging side of this, the writing side of this. We spent yesterday together, and I was listening to your story yesterday as well, and you're talking about these deep dives and these extended written pieces. And one of the things that we know we're grappling with at all times is limited attention spans. You both just smiled and nodded at the exact same moment. And so do you feel that you had the success you'd hoped for at such a deep dive and such a detailed presentation of a producer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on how you define success, right? Like, we joke all the time that, like, in a moment in time where everyone's attention span is getting shorter and shorter, and really, they want to read less and listen more, and we are like, what we should do to build a brand off of? Let's write incredibly long, detailed, thoughtful pieces that cover the whole, spectrum of why these distilleries. It's irrational.
Yeah,
I think that's okay, and I would consider it successful because our success metrics isn't mass consumer appeal, isn't it is trying to share the complete story, because we think that the people out there who have taken out a second mortgage, who have left careers and taken on this risk to do something irrational,
that's well said,
right, deserves that care and attention, even if it means, all right, some people are not going to have the time or interest to read 7 pages on a small independent producer. That's okay. But, like, for us, success is the quality of the story, it's the completeness of the story, and I feel like that's been successful for us, but irrational. And also, like, starting a small blended product is a bit irrational, but, we're motivated by things beyond the rational, I suppose.
Yeah, a thumbs up from Devin on that one. He's quite happy with that. So then you've got this transition from the detailed written word. When you're now bringing your blends together and you're American focused, you just said this a moment ago, Chase, where you're not looking for this to be a bourbon blend, a rye blend. Am I understanding correctly? You're looking to blend bourbons with ryes, with single malts, however those may come together, and that's not even the limit of what you're looking to do?
Yeah, I think, as a company, we're sort of planting our flag in the American whiskey spot, and that's because part of what we're trying to do is sort of challenge the concept of what American whiskey can be in the first place.
Sure.
And how it can evolve, in large part because, the larger ethos of the company with expanding the overall profile of the craft whiskey movement and craft whiskey producers. In 2010, I think there were 195 distilleries in this country. Now, in 2024, we're pushing up against 3,000.
Yeah.
There are distilleries making whiskey in every single state in the U.S. And so the diversity of what whiskey can be and how whiskey can be made is certainly larger than it has been in a very long time, if not wider than maybe it's ever been before. So I don't want to use the word pigeonhole because I don't want to discredit what distillers are doing. If they're making a phenomenal bourbon and they're making a phenomenal rye, obviously that's totally within their right and important for the moment. But rather than sort of just put another blended bourbon on the market, blended rye on the market, we saw an opportunity to create something distinctive and unique, something that challenges the norm and hopefully, pushes the conversation forward about what American whiskey can be, what a blended whiskey can be, while using the unique components of the bourbons, ryes, malts, sweet whiskeys, single pot stills that we source from our, distillery partners to shine that light back on them. So yeah, we're in the, wide, ambiguous realm of American blended whiskey. That's kind of where we want to live.
Oh gosh, I'm starting to get overwhelmed with the follow-up questions. So I saw your Volume 1 and Volume 2 labels last night, and you've got the producer, you've got their logo on a portion of your label.
Yeah.
You're taking their stock. Obviously, you're purchasing their stock. It's not a midnight heist.
Not yet.
So you're acquiring stock from them. You've got flavor profiles. You're bringing this together. You're seeing where it fits. And then you're bottling that and putting their logo on it along with your packaging. Any pushback there? Any questioning there from a producer saying, ooh, I don't know how I feel about losing some of the control over our product?
There probably should be more. To be honest with you, I'm still surprised anybody gives us their whiskey at all. But the one beautiful thing that I've noticed in these last 4 years since we started the company and since we've been interviewing distillers is just how strong the community is.
That's nice.
I think there is a sense, a wider sense within the industry that a rising tide floats all ships. And the other great thing about working with entrepreneurs and people who got into this industry for the right reason and not because they're, father and great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather and great-great-great-grandfather all have the same name and have worked at the same place. Not that I'm, implying anything about any other brand, but a lot of these guys got into it for a passion. So I think, important part of Borrowed Page for us is that we only work with producers that we have previously featured on the website. So these are people that we've sat down with for several hours. We know why they do the things they do. We know what motivates them. We've tasted the whiskey. We see the passion in the result that's in the bottle. And we've taken the time for them to get to know us a little bit. I think it's about showing these producers that we have a passion and we have a vision and that we want them to be a part of that, and then them trusting that we're not going to do something to harm their brand. We're not going to feature their whiskey in a way that's going to be negative. And finding people who are on board with what we're trying to do in the same way that we came on board with what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
So I think it's about creating a mutual trust. And luckily we've done a pretty good job of that. So we really haven't run into a ton of objection or concern. And I think that speaks to the larger craft whiskey community and also just, trying to build trust along the way.
Yeah, no, I think that trust is vital, and absolutely, as independent bottlers, we are taking, we heard this yesterday from Iron Root as well, we're taking their cask babies, right? And we're sending them out into the world, and we must do our best to best represent. And so I love what you just said a moment ago about community as well. And we are supporting each other. We are lifting one another up when able. Talk to me a little bit about the blending of the first two volumes. Joshua and I have done limited blending in our time. We always go back to doing the Bloggers blend in 2010 or something like that with Master Malt. And it's not easy. And I'm curious to hear about your experience where you think it's moving in the direction you like, you think you add one more component, and it falls apart or moves in a very different direction. What's that experience been like across your first two volumes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Devin or I would present ourselves as like these well-credentialed blenders. We had the foresight to bring in some people with experience to guest blend with us and kind of be our blending mentors and Sherpas, which has been fantastic. So for volume one, Ann Dimmick came in and helped us work through it. And it helped us get comfortable with trusting our instincts a little bit. We have been exposed to a lot of whiskeys. We review a lot of whiskeys. We talk about it like we home blend, but we, not in a commercial sense. And so she really kind of helped create a little bit of a process to it and help kind of build some confidence and trust in like when to know your instincts are on the money and when to kind of be able to check yourself and be like, all right, this is where we're adrift and we need to put the things down and come back to it. So the guest blender piece has been important for us. For volume 2, we worked with Ryan Mills, or AKA that one dude Ryan, from social media fame. Okay. And it all started during COVID. So we had the added wrinkle of like having to do it virtually and remotely from one another. And so we had the same samples sent to every location of people participating. The way it's worked for us is we kind of independently evaluated all of the samples from the various producers that we're considering. So, from barrel to barrel, like this one's a little bit sweeter, that one's a little bit spicier. Yeah. This one has a better nose, but maybe a flatter palate, whatever. Maybe you kind of create that profile of all into the individual components that we were considering using. And then we kind of came back together and we really just shared that information and then started from there. And once we knew like what colors were on the palette, so to speak, we started conceptualizing, all right, well, what does the final product really like, what are we trying to be? And it's rough blocking ideas. It could be this, it could be that, but we definitely don't want it to be this other thing. And that helps us try and narrow down which barrels we kind of start using more or less. And then we break away and we independently create our own favorite blends. And then we come back together and share notes. I like yours, and we make each other's blends. And you just, it's kind of this process of fine tuning. But I think, launching it all during COVID, almost formed our process to an extent for us, where we just there is this portion of it that's individually driven and this portion of it that's collaboratively driven, and we kind of oscillate between the two to ultimately end up where we did for each volume.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, the beautiful thing about this, and maybe because we don't have this long pedigree of blending, is that we're very much so still evolving as blenders. And, with the experience of working with Anne for volume 1 and Ryan for volume 2, we're pretty committed at this point to bringing in a new guest blender for each subsequent release of Borrowed Page. And that, I think that's kind of twofold. From a storytelling aspect, which is what we're all about with these releases, it's bringing in a new perspective for our consumers. It's, I think Chase said this last night when we were all sort of hanging out together, but he knows my palate pretty well at this point. I know his palate pretty well at this point. Bringing in sort of a dissenting opinion, it can be helpful. But even, being here at Wizard Academy, we were at the Independent Bottler Symposium yesterday, which was incredible. Speaking with people like Irene Tan and Marianne Eves and, picking their brains a little bit. I'm excited to go into the next blend because I feel like I have a few more tools in my tool belt now. So yeah, COVID and circumstance sort of created the process, I guess, for how we put these blends together. But what's been really fun is just getting a chance to continue to evolve as blenders and continue to try to just say, the next Borrowed Page is going to be the best thing that we can do. Not to make this answer way too long, but there's the added wrinkle of the fact that the way we're trying to blend is pretty different. If you're dealing with a more of a standard blend, you can kind of do that, perfumer's pyramid style of blending with let's find the base, let's find the central star, and then we can kind of pepper in these, little ancillary flavors here and there, with our goal of having these blends be something that can also really highlight each whiskey that's there. It limits us in terms of the number of barrels that we can put into this blend because we don't want it to get too diluted and confusing. But it also means that, we're not doing 3% of this thing.
Yes.
We're doing 20% is our base, or, maybe 15% is our lowest level thing, and trying to find a way to make bourbons and ryes and malts and pot still whiskey all play nice together.
Yeah.
And I think one of the more interesting things that we've learned along the way is adding a little bit more of this thing that's sweet doesn't necessarily make the blend sweeter, because it might take the thing that was spicy and just make it disappear.
Yeah.
So that it's not necessarily an additive and subtractive process. It can be a little bit, reductive here and there. So it's been a fun journey so far.
And that's, you ended up speaking to the exact aspect that is always in my mind with blending, is it's not additive. That's beautifully put there. I'm curious, because I have heard you guys say it a couple of times. You said it a moment ago. You, Devin, how would you describe Chase's palate?
Well, first of all, I think his palate has changed over the years.
Since kindergarten?
Since kindergarten, certainly. Less. He definitely leans less towards the appley notes. But no, I mean, when Chase and I were, let's just call it, more casual whiskey drinkers, he leaned heavy into the sort of Old Forester profile. I think he actually leaned a little bit more into that oaky kind of spiciness. I think his palate has not softened over the years, but I think he's over the years he's grown more of an appreciation for subtler, even more floral notes. And I'll make him describe what my palate is like.
Absolutely, that's the follow-up.
Well, and he can also tell me if I'm right or not about how his palate has maybe evolved over the years.
Yeah, it's definitely evolved, and I think you're spot on with that. I think be self-aware for a moment. It's more like when I first got into it, it was the big, heavy-handed notes that you could easily latch on to identify. Like that's what I gravitated towards, and then as I just drank more and more,
in a professional capacity,
you're right? It's the more delicate, subtle, nuanced pieces become more of interest, right? Like oak is kind of ever present, really for American whiskeys. And so it's like, what else kind of becomes the question. It's funny. I've never actually tried to describe Devin's palate. It's kind of like when I taste it, I know it. And so this is going to be an interesting endeavor that I'm mildly intimidated by. For Devin, like, there is a bit of a range, right, that he can like, right? I think it works for us and Borrowed Page, where it's like you don't necessarily want to pigeonhole into one sort of thing. I think there's an appreciation for a wider range of flavors, but it needs to kind of be something that has a beginning, middle, and end, right? Something that takes you on a bit of a journey. Now, where you start, where you end, it doesn't matter quite as much as like it's not one note. Strong finish is definitely a must. I think it's one of those things like it could be the best nose, the best early palate, mid palate, and then if you just come to an aggressive stop, it's like it just throws cold water on the whole thing. So I think it's more about kind of that variety and kind of that journey on the palate more so than any one flavor. I would say the one note that he tends to gravitate more is like if you're doing a bourbon, it's probably a spicier bourbon, a high rye or something. Not a big wheated bourbon guy. So that would be my sort of cop-out answer onto what his palate tastes like or is like.
He's getting a thumbs up over that one. So.
We can all be political, right? Just talk a lot and say very little.
But the spice there is driving you, Devin. It's not so much the softer wheat notes.
I mean, I think Chase actually like nailed my palate, or at least what interests me in whiskey, which really is like being told a story or being taken on a journey. Even if a whiskey tastes amazing, if it tastes the same from the front of the palate through the back of the palate, I can be like, yeah, that's tasty. Yeah. But like, it's not gonna rattle around in my brain. But when something starts one way and then takes a hard left turn in the middle and then ends up somewhere, totally new at the end. And actually, Jason, you and I were talking about this with a whiskey yesterday. I also love it when some whiskeys just have this like sudden burst of flavor. It's like a surprise. I think I related it to eating a Gushers candy.
100%. Yep. We did discuss that candy.
That's probably my favorite thing that happens with whiskey is when, it has a great open, and then somewhere in that mid palate, it's just like bam. Yeah. And I would say texture is really important for me. And I think when you get into blending, and when you get into whiskey more seriously, that's the piece that quickly becomes more important than you thought it was going to be. I work at Stranahan's for my day job in Colorado, and we have this incredible head blender, Justin Aiden, and he has been nice enough to sort of, I think he appreciates my palate, so he brings me in to taste stuff throughout the year, and texture is like his number one thing. Yep. And he's got words that nobody else uses to describe, like slippery or slick or like, I mean, I can't even think of all of them right now, but, I think body is big for me too. The quickest way to turn me off on a whiskey is for it to be kind of flat.
Yep, that thin experience across the palate.
Yeah.
We sometimes talk about flat, flabby.
Yeah.
Rich and unctuous.
Yeah,
is
unctuous
is
is
a
one.
good pairing that we tend to offer up.
Yeah, delectable is a word I like to use.
there
a
you go,
lot, 'cause
delectable.
It's like makes me feel like I'm eating some fancy dessert.
Oh,
You
okay.
know?
Okay. Like decadent. Like
yeah,
decadence.
exactly.
Moorish is something we
Sure.
throw around.
That sounds very Scottish. But I mean, to your original question, yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of wheat in general. Now that said, I've had great wheated bourbons. I think you guys had a single cask nation MGP 7-year wheated bourbon out on the table last night. That was phenomenal.
Cheers.
You know, and I've had full-on wheat whiskeys like Bainbridge Island or Bainbridge Organic Distillers out in Bainbridge Island. Probably makes some of the best wheat whiskey in the world. But in general, with wheated bourbons, like, you know, I'm going to get canceled over this, but like, I'm not a Pappy guy. I'm not a Weller guy. I'm not a Maker's Mark guy. You know, like, it's just not my flavor profile. I think I do like a little bit more action that rye gives you in the back end. But to what Chase was saying before, you know, my first love with whiskey was Irish whiskey. Then I got introduced to Scotch single malts, and then got more into bourbons, and then became more of a rye drinker. So it's like, I really do have an appreciation for a wide spectrum of flavor profiles. Except for wheated bourbons.
So that's actually the direction I want to go. I want to get into a little bit of the whiskey nerdery, and then I want to get into a little bit of the business chatter as much as you're able to share. But as you're looking around America, as you're experiencing multiple styles, what are you finding emerging, or what are you finding producers getting excited about? I'm curious that side of your experience with your conversation with producers.
Well, I'll say two things, and maybe one of them is more personal, and one of them is more, you know, general, what I've seen.
So long as neither one gets you cancelled.
I can't promise
Double
that.
cancellation.
Yeah. I mean, I've already got half of Kentucky listening to this. Like, fuck that guy. I dropped the first one. But and my dad, who loves wheated bourbon, but also loves, you know, sherry finished or sherry matured Scotch. So I can get him back. I'll say that the quality of craft whiskey, I think, is something that I'm seeing improve even over just the 4 years that we've been running the website. Not to say that the whiskey that we were drinking at the beginning was bad, because it was not. But I'll give one example, and hopefully they will appreciate this comment. But Whiskey Del Bach was our second ever featured on the website. You know, that would have been sort of mid 2020 that we interviewed them. They sent us their Old Pueblo, their unaged mesquite smoked single malt. They sent us their Dorado, which is their mesquite smoked single malt. They sent us their classic. All of the whiskeys were good, very good. But the Dorado today, I mean, you can see it in the critical acclaim that it's getting all around the world, the awards that it's winning. That mesquite smoked single malt from Whiskey Del Bach today is like stellar.
Okay.
Something incredible.
Okay.
So I think one of the things that I'm seeing is just like, you know, maybe when we started this, a lot of distilleries were at like level 2. I think they're at like level 3, level 4, level 5 now, and it's coming on quick. So I think the quality of the whiskeys being produced by craft producers, especially ones that have been around a little bit longer, is really immense. The thing that excites me when we are doing these interviews and we're tasting these whiskeys is when somebody brings something to the table that is just very different. You know, the one that really pops out to me is that probably the smallest distillery that we ever interviewed was this place called Shadow Ridge in Oceanside, California, run by a former naval officer. He still works his day job working for the Navy. He sub-rents space from a distillery, so he doesn't even own the distillery himself. He comes from a home brewing background. So he makes a bourbon. I don't want to misquote the mash bill, but it's just about as close to 51% corn. In fact, it might be. If it's not, it's like 54% corn. And the rest of it is a variety of different style malts, in the beer tradition.
Okay.
And it was a great bourbon, but more importantly, it was unlike any bourbon I had ever tasted in my entire life. I would love to have Shadow Ridge in a borrowed page one day. I mean, they can barely make enough bottles to sell out of the, in California, because they are incredibly small. But, I love Sean to death, and I just think that what he's doing is so cool. So I would say it's situations like that. It's seeing great matured whiskey coming out of these distillers, just getting better and better, but it's also seeing like who's out there sort of really putting their character on a standard that is sort of changing the game, changing the name.
Sure.
Yeah, just to add on, right, because I think Devin touched on something that is so interesting and inspiring about the craft space, right, is like, Kentucky spirits is well forged, Scotch is well forged. We kind of get that. So collectively, it sort of feels like in the craft movement, there's this shared question being asked of like, what else, right? Like, what other flavor profiles can we explore? What other processes can we, new things from the production side? Can we incorporate different grain varietals? And then we're seeing this kind of explosion of variety that's happening. I think is maybe the most interesting thing. It sort of felt like when we started, there was a lot of like barrel finishing going on to attain this variety of flavor that didn't necessarily exist elsewhere. And where we're at now is like some people are really doubling down on grain varietals, and not just like let's try things, like let's actually scientifically and methodically go about trying to figure out what is the difference from varietal A versus varietal B, and they're even specializing. Corn variety, I'm going to explore that with a wooden hat, right, or a rye variety out with the far north. And so what we're seeing is like this, and there's so much dialogue and sharing of information that's happening from craft producers that like there is just this rapid learning that's happening.
Yeah,
and I talk about like the palette that people can draw from to paint a new picture, right? It is expanding so much bigger and faster than whiskey, which is a traditionally very slow evolving space. Is happening quite rapidly here in the craft movement, and that's the most exciting thing. So I don't want to necessarily say it's grain varietal or it's barrel finishing or it's production or whatever it may be, yeast or whatever it may be. It's like, I think it's this collective feeling of like, what is that new frontier that we can learn more about, and then share that knowledge with as many people as possible so they can take it in their own direction.
Well, and just to like, I think shrink what you just said into like a bite-sized thing is like, what's really exciting is that like the next cool thing in whiskey is probably in a barrel somewhere, and we just don't know about it right now.
Okay. Oh, interesting. There's a ponderable.
Yeah.
That's nice. I like that. That's very good. You've thrown me for a loop there. That was very, very well said. So,
In short, which is not my style.
I thought I had at least 3 more minutes to formulate my next question. So I'm picking up on your passion. I'm seeing your excitement here. I'm seeing the way you're both representing producers and what that means to you. We know there's then another step to this, which is finding the consumer. And here you've got 2 young guys coming out into the world here, offering up a bespoke blend, if I may call it such. Are you finding that audience? How are you finding, and actually I think I should ask my first question, which is, how are you selling this? Are you e-com? Are you direct to consumer? Are you retail? Are you key states? What's that part looking like? And then the consumer finding question.
Yeah, so very important questions. So we started out when we released Volume 1. We were strictly e-commerce, sold through the website. Now, for legal reasons, it's really someone else's
100%,
online
yep.
store, but it's kind of embedded within our website to try and, do a little smoke and mirrors. Like, it's all our website, but it's not really.
The 3-tier system is being respected
Yeah,
in
so-
everything you're doing.
Yep. So all, TTB, we're compliant.
Yep.
Yeah. So it was e-commerce, right? The original idea is we had amassed a small but dedicated kind of consumer base that like really appreciated the quality of content. Now, again, we probably could have done a better job of making our content more quote unquote snackable.
Oh, okay.
As industry speak of like more viral, I suppose is. But no, we went for the longer form. So like we had this kind of core audience, and we did see a really good kind of initial surge on online retail for both Volume 1 and Volume 2. But that the audience is not big enough to really sustain in a rapid turnover of inventory way. So we were like, all right, we need to keep the online piece going, but we also need to get on the shelves and start building kind of retailer relationships. And it was always kind of part of the path or the plan for American Mash Grain and Borrowed Page. We knew it would be housed or like located in Colorado, but when we launched the company, Devin was living in Brooklyn, I was in New Orleans, so it was kind of like years down the road. We are now both in Colorado, and we are on the shelves. I think we're up to 70-ish locations throughout the state of Colorado,
Okay.
predominantly in the Front Range, a couple in the Western Slope. And so, that's brought on a whole new kind of opportunity, but also wrinkle to the equation. What we're realizing is the hand-to-hand combat, so to speak, at these locations is, getting the shelf talkers that kind of very quickly say, "Oh, we've won some awards, so it's not complete shit," right? We got some posters to kind of do a little more education of like what makes us different, and then really like in-store tastings, right? Like the people who are going to the store week in, week out, foot traffic, and trying to meet them where they are, so to speak.
Are you able to pour samples, liquid samples for consumers walking by in a store?
Yeah.
Because we know like the US is 50 different countries worth of rules, but Colorado allows that.
Yes.
Nice.
Which is fantastic. And our distributor has been great to work with on that front, helping kind of, Devin and I each have day jobs, right? Like we can't, and we have kids. So like, it is going to take a little bit of a village. But it's fundamentally changing how the company is thinking about or going about acquiring new consumers, away from this captured online audience to finding people, meeting them where they are. We do need to start getting more into the farmers markets and festivals and those sorts of places. Okay. But it's all, it's just part of our growth journey of becoming a little savvier and, allocation of resources to make that happen.
That makes good sense.
Yeah, I think it's like you think about the sort of Venn diagram of people that are out there, and there are the hardcore whiskey nerds who will just see a product like ours and hear about what we're doing and immediately see the value and be excited and be like, yeah, I'll go online and buy a bottle of that, see what it's like. And then, but for the larger piece of that pie, right, the average consumer who has no idea who we are, what we're about,
Yep.
sees the bottle on the shelf, there's there's so much education that needs to go into what it is that we're doing, which is an uphill climb. So like speaking to what Chase was saying, I think that sort of reforming our strategy into sort of meeting them where they are, which I think was a good way of putting it, so that they can hear from us what it is and why it's important and why it's special. Because once you drink the whiskey, I think it's a no question like good product, special product, but it's how do you get that cork popped? You know what I mean? But another big part of Borrowed Page, because we're so transparent about what we're doing, is because we're featuring the distilleries on the front of the label, it's also leveraging our partners. It's, tell your dedicated fans that you're a part of this, get them excited about it as well. So, we do, part of, what makes us appealing to them is that, we're going to market this product that their whiskey is in day out, blood, sweat, and tears to try to get it in front of people that maybe wouldn't normally get to taste their whiskeys. But, the other side of the coin is like, post about us on social media, like get the word out to your fan base, and hopefully try to ride their coattails a little bit as well.
Have you had any of those come to Jesus moments when you're detail-oriented guys, but you've got 30 seconds to capture someone's attention when they've stopped to take a taste of what you're pouring for them? Has there been a moment where you've shortened that delivery to a point where you're like, oh, I don't know if we really got across what we are about?
Well, it makes me think of a question that Chase asked basically every distillery we've ever featured, which is like, if you only could tell a consumer 2 things about your brand,
okay, yep.
What are those 2 things? But yeah, I mean, as a historically long-winded person, which is who I am, I do think that it helped. My very first job in the industry was working as a brand ambassador in New York City for Wiggle Whiskey out in Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. And so my main job for them was to do exactly this, which was, you've got somebody walking through a liquor store, you've got a little table set up with bottles, you have their attention for 30 seconds,
yep.
Like, do what it is that you're going to do. So I think sort of having that experience in my back pocket has taught me. And also, doing tours, running tour programs, working in tasting rooms, working behind the bar at different distilleries, you kind of learn how to adjust the message based on what the situation you're in and who you have in front of you.
Yep.
Even for somebody like me who can just go on and on and on.
Yeah, you're looking at people working out, okay, the eyes are getting deader and deader. I better skip to the conclusion here.
Yeah, there's something interesting going on among the general American consumer, right? Where like there is an awakening of sorts happening. Not everyone, but I think people are, in the same way that people became a little bit savvy about beer or savvy about wine, it is starting to happen for whiskey, but like there isn't a base level of knowledge that you can assume an average, like a random person walking in or a person you're talking to has.
Yep.
And quite frankly, Bard Page is conceptually kind of dense or difficult to succinctly communicate, right? Like there is this notion of we didn't make it, we sourced and blended it. A blend is this, these are the producers, but then you also have like, what is an independent bottler, or what, it's not a bourbon. It's also not a single malt. Like, there are these like conceptually very difficult things and where I've had the most success with people who know, I'm going to say very little sounds mean, but like people who are like at the very beginning of their kind of educational journey, let's call it, is like, is like we are mixing together, and I'll use mixing time to time versus blend, which definitely not valid, but we're taking, some bourbon because, we really like the sweet components, and some rye because we like the spicy components, and the single malts because we like that malty rich component. And we're creating something totally new. So it's not going to be like your bourbon. It's not going to be like your single. And kind of leaning a little bit on that difference. And then also, what resonates easily, I think, with people is like, oh, no, like we partnered or we collaborated with an independent producer in Pittsburgh that you can't get here. Or Arizona that you can't get here is like you like the craft thing. It exists in spirits. But it's not, you can't, there's still pockets.
Yeah.
And so I was like trying to lean on that, like, oh, it's kind of this experience or exposure to craft products or what's going on in another state or another region that you may not have easy access to. And I feel that's potentially incomplete. And I feel like maybe we need to continue to figure out the easiest, most succinct way to communicate what the product is or who we are. And that comes down to just finding what resonates best or most quickly. But this trial and error.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a little bit of an inside baseball kind of question to be had here, but we always go down the nerdy path with our listeners here. And one of the things as producers in a retail space, and you were talking about the shelf talkers, but I think there's also shelf space. And if you're doing volumes of release, like volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, are you aware of if there's a delay in the supply chain for volume 3, you may very well lose that space that you have carved out on that shelf?
Yeah, I mean, we've been on the shelves just since November of last year.
Okay.
So we're still so new.
Right. Right.
And, right now when inventory sells through, we have more volume 1 and volume 2. Now we are running thin on that inventory, which is a very good thing. But it's going to be a new challenge and a series of new challenges we're kind of running, into, which is the learning curve of releasing your own craft product. But yeah, like the timing and the sequencing of release of volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, for us, when we started, we raised as little capital as possible. And, the idea was like we could release volume 1 using kind of 100% of that capital. And when that sells through enough, we can release volume 2 with the recycled / modestly improved capital. And so like volume 3 is like, we don't necessarily have the luxury of just saying, all right, it's going to be in February, it's going to be in March. You can't program it out that way. We are doing other things to help grow the business, to help bring some predictability and some structure to these things. But we're new and we're kind of figuring it out, and so I think this is just where we are in our journey, and hopefully by the end of the year we can get to a place where volume 3, volume 4, volume 5 are regularly released, and maybe there's an expansion, not a massive one, but getting a couple more SKUs to explore some of these other creative areas within the craft spirit space that Devin and I have been kicking around a little bit.
And just as we're talking about kind of where it all fits within a line or a potentially expanding line, volume 1, volume 2, cask strength, natural cask strength, any dilution for flavor purposes there. And then again, as you're talking, maybe we need to go meet people at farmers markets. Is cask strength offerings a big step up for some of the people you're hoping to meet?
So we have no line in the sand of where a borrowed page release is going to come in terms of proof. The first 2 have skewed on higher levels. Volume 1 was cask strength. Volume 2 was proof down to 110 proof.
Okay.
Working in the American whiskey space specifically, because there are not many standards limiting what we're doing, Chase and I were very clear with each other when we started Borrowed Page that we did not want to impose unnecessary standards on ourselves. So we will bottle Borrowed Page at what we believe the whiskey is at its best. And whether that hurts our margins because we're bottling less and therefore have less whiskey to sell, or whether that helps us out and we can add some water and we can bottle more bottles. Volume 1 was 724 bottles. Volume 2 was 930 something. And that's kind of the beauty of Borrowed Page, is that they are limited release. They are special. They are kind of one and dones, like get it while you can, because once it's gone, it's gone.
I'm familiar.
But yeah. But no, in terms of the proof, we tend to skew higher proof. We think that the larger whiskey enthusiast community tends to gravitate towards something at a higher proof. But that doesn't mean that we wouldn't bottle something lower if we felt that that's where the whiskey sang the best.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of elaborate a little bit, I think it starts with we were very clearly aligned on what our philosophy about the product was, right? Instead of having rules, it was, kind of these intangible commitments, like, it needed to be big in flavor, right? And have the beginning, middle, and end that we kind of talked about. So we were very conscious about that. We wanted it to have a really good nose and also a really good palate. We try and blend to hit both of those things, which sound obvious, right? I'm not this is not, anyone who's making blends understands like that's an aspirational thing. I know, trade secrets. But then there was like, from the proofing standpoint is the quality of the product is more important than the bottom line. Yeah. Right. And so that gives us the freedom to say, if it's cask strength, great. If it's 110, great. If it needs to be 100, totally fine. It's just without trying to let the business side inform the product side. We kind of made a commitment to do that. And so I think it's just about the philosophy, and we're hoping that's the kind of the tether that ties a lot of Borrowed Page together, right? It's we want to blend it whereby the individual components are recognizable and celebrated within it, but also, the sum of the parts tells its own, has its own value. High flavor, and then collaboration, transparency, is the kind of the key pieces that hopefully from volume 1 to volume 2 create some continuity, even if the flavor profile and the notes are totally different.
Okay. That all makes perfect sense. And I know we're laughing here about not sharing any trade secrets, but it is having that ethos and sticking to it and knowing what's important to you and what line you will not cross. So that's good stuff. As we're starting to wind up here, Devin has got skin that might burn even easier than mine, and we're conducting an open-air interview here in a Texas morning, and I can feel my skin starting to crinkle. And so we're not in a rush to get out of here, but I am aware of what we're doing to our skin sitting here.
I'm slowly melting away.
I can feel a sunburn happening. The cloud cover is starting to dissipate as well. Thank you. He just passed the sun factor 30 there. I've got sun factor 55 in my room. So a couple of things. We keep saying the website. We keep saying e-commerce. Like, where can people learn about you? Where can people read these lengthy missives, these paeans to American craft production?
Yeah, if you've got 10 minutes to read an article. No. The website is mash, M-A-S-H, the letter N, grain.com. So mashandgrain.com. You can also find us on pretty much every social channel that's out there at the same moniker, mashandgrain.com, or Mash and Grain. And yeah, that's where you can find our shop, buy our whiskeys. And if you're in Colorado and you go into a liquor store and they don't have Borrowed Page, ask the liquor store owner, what's up?
There you
Why
go.
don't you have Borrowed Page?
That's the message we're always sending out. Consumer empowerment. If you want a thing, ask for a thing and make a thing happen. And so now, really, before we get out of here, can you give us sneak peeks on Volume 3? Can you speak in general terms?
So, no. But I will tell you that when Volume 1 came out, it was very much so a proof of concept. This is what we want to do. We want to work with craft producers. We want to blend multiple styles. We want to create something, wholly unique that also paid homage to the makers. I think in many ways, Volume 2 was also a proof of concept of, similar to what Chase was just saying, it's going to be a radically different whiskey. But there is a through line of bold flavor, great texture, incredible finish, wonderful nose. That's the quality you can expect, even if you don't quite know what the flavor profile is going to be. So I think the first two have really been proof of concept, and what I'm excited with Volume 3 and with future volumes is that now that we've proved the concept out, I think we can really focus on telling incredible stories with these blends. So one tease I'll give is that I think Volume 3 is a really exciting story that we're going to be telling with it. And the other tease I'll give you is that we turned a distiller who told us no for an earlier volume, and they have become a yes.
Oh, wonderful!
So we have succeeded in changing a no from a yes over these first two volumes. So we will have somebody in Volume 3 who has come on board.
Wonderful. Do you know who your third blender will be? Even if you're not going to name them.
Yeah, we've put some feelers out. We've had some conversations. We have multiple people who have said, absolutely, we would love to be a guest blender for Borrowed Page, but we have not made a decision on who the Volume 3 guest blender is going to be.
Well, thank you. I'm watching you melt in front of me, Devin.
Oh, yeah.
I made you face the sun as well. This has turned into an interrogation.
I feel it.
The Texas sun burning down.
My Topo Chico is gone.
Well, let me say thanks so much, A, for your time, and B, for the conversations we've had over the last couple of days, even without mics in our hands and without the record button being hit. Wish you both absolute success. Looking at two mid-30-year-olds with young kids takes me back to 12, 13 years to Joshua and I launching Single Cask Nation, being very similar spots, young families going on the road, It's tough. It's really tough, but I love your passion. I love your enthusiasm. I love your willingness to celebrate community and that trust within that community. So, been brilliant getting to know you. Reach out if we can help in any way. And thanks for being on the podcast.
Cheers. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Let's find some shade.
Yeah.
As discussed with the chaps there are a couple of volumes into this series, and as you heard there, they like having an opportunity to tell distillery stories. And they're telling those stories through flavours. Their blends are called Borrowed Page.
Yep.
At the time of this recording, they have released volume 2 of Borrowed Page. And I wanted to give shout out here. The blend has 3 components. It is 37% Mammoth Distillery Woolly Rye. Mammoth are in northern Michigan. 38% Virginia Distillery Company American Single Malt, just down the road from me in Virginia. And 25% Talnua Distillery American Single Pot Still Whiskey. And Talnua are in Colorado.
Yeah. Yep.
And while, yes, I did have a chance to taste both volumes on site with the chaps, neither one of them was a formal sit-down thinking cap on. I am going to say I enjoyed both of them. I thoroughly enjoyed dramming on them in the company of Devin and Chase and Irene and Daniel Whittington. Nora and Adam were around as well of Lost Lantern. Didn't get them on wax in person. We just recently had them on the podcast. But lovely hanging out with them in Austin as well. Irene Tan was fantastic as well, and her episode was well received. So yeah, just great whiskies, sitting around, dramming with people, chatting with people, talking independent bottling, talking about the future, talking about the present, for heaven's sakes. Just like the question we had in from Dan Greisen about the present condition of American single malt. We did. I hope this isn't talking out of school, but I always like to give the listeners a little peek behind the curtain. I would say we were having a similar conversation behind closed doors about the growth of American single malt and what's it going to take to really capture the attention of America and then the world. But I think it speaks to what we've got going on here with Devin and Chase, where all of us independent bottlers are getting out and telling distillery stories. We're representing the people who are working at those distilleries day in and day out. The mark that they're trying to make with American single malt. And I think so long as good people keep banging the drum of American single malt and worthwhile people in the trenches making it every day, we're just going to keep putting in the time. We're going to have Dan Greisen telling people about it. We're going to have members of the nation telling people about it. And all those fans of other independent bottlers and fans of other American single malt producers, we're all going to be talking about it all the time. Yeah. It's going to catch. It's coming. It's coming.
I think about this moment in time, and 13, almost 14 years ago, it was just you and me as an American-based independent bottlers beating the drum. There was Wild Scotsman as well. Who he was doing his thing, which was fantastic. But for the most part, there really weren't American independent bottlers. Now there are more. Now there are more helping to tell that story, and hopefully the pushing of water uphill will seem like it's a slightly less steep incline.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, agreed.
I had a question for you, but I wanted to hold that question until after we put a little whiskey across our teeth. We really don't have any news to be sharing, at least not in this episode. So I thought, screw the news. Let's go to tasting some whiskey, and then I'm going to ask you that question. Don't forget, or I should say, remind me that I have a question for you, because once we're a little ways into this whiskey, I may have forgotten that I have a question for you. So we have in our glass another sample from Blind Barrels, and regular listeners will remember. Well, regular listeners might be thinking, Jesus Christ, it's taking you long enough to get to sample C in the Blind Barrels.
I tell you, we've been tasting some fun things along the way as well. I'm happy with how much we've been tasting. But yes, I do thank our friends at Blind Barrels for their patience as we're working through the June 2022 box.
Yep.
From them.
So we've got sample C in our glass, and I have made a point to not look at the details of sample C. That'll be on you, Jason.
Oh, yeah. I've still got the website is closed. I'm looking at an envelope that says click to reveal sample C.
Okay. All right. Well, I've poured said whiskey into my glass, and I'm looking at the color, and I would say it's like a deep, maybe just a nice honey color.
Yeah. Do you know what I thought when I looked at the color of it?
What's that?
Warm, clear apple cider.
Oh, I'll buy that. Warm, clear apple cider. A slightly darker apple cider. Some apple ciders are
Can be quite pale.
Can be quite pale. This is going to be on the darker side. Think of your American apple cider, just clear, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe even an apple juice quality to it.
There you go.
Yeah, nice on the nose. I'm not getting it currently, but at first sniff, I got that a little whiff of baby aspirin.
Well, the first sniff, I got alcohol, which tells me this might be a slightly higher ABV. And when you say baby aspirin, you're talking like orange creamsicle sort of scent to it, right?
A little powdery.
Okay. Yeah, there's a sweetness to it for sure.
I'll throw my hat in the ring and say the bubbles are suggesting 54% alcohol to me.
Oh, I love this. I love your little bubble system. That's just where you count the number of bubbles as they dissipate, or the
Yeah, it's tricky on younger whiskies. The bubbles will dissipate quite quickly. But a double ring will give you 50% alcohol. Every ring inside will add 2% alcohol. But a bit like reading the tea leaves, they A, don't hang around, and then B, they don't dissipate in the same pattern. So you're looking for little pockets where the bubbles are trying to tell you a story.
So there's a nice sort of oaky presence to this, sort of like a oak spice / sweetness coming through on the nose.
Yeah, good oil ringing the glass here as well. Oh, yeah, little maybe oh gosh, what are they called? Red Hots. Maybe a little Red Hots here, which is the cinnamon candy.
Yeah, cinnamon candy, which anytime I smell cinnamon in a whiskey, specifically American whiskey, it makes me think that it's a younger whiskey with a higher barley proportion in the mash bill. Not necessarily American single malt, but if the malted barley is a part and parcel of the mash bill, the cinnamon tends to pop for me. Maybe it hops in.
Do you, just from the nose alone, do you have a sense of style? You're throwing barley around here with these cinnamon notes.
You know, when I first noticed it, I said, okay, this smells like single malt to me. But then as I get a little deeper, that oak presence is quite prominent, and it reminds me of a toasted oak or perhaps new charred. And there are so few Scotch whiskey producers that are using new charred oak to mature their whiskey. So it makes me think that it's likely going to be an American spirit. It does not smell Canadian.
cask has, to my nose, the cask has huge presence on the nose.
I quite like the nose, I'll tell you that.
After a little sip, going back to the nose, it softens out for me a little bit, actually. After first sip, some of that spice of the nose, some of that heat on the nose, some of that big cask presence kind of dials back a little bit.
Getting a bit of citrus. I haven't sipped mine yet. I'm trying to figure out the nose. I'm getting a little bit of key lime citrus qualities on the nose.
It is bright.
Yeah, right. It's real bright. All right, I'm gonna go in for the sip. All right. Oh, that's interesting. There's a real waxy texture to it. Texture is really nice, but there's a upfront sort of peppery quality, a little bit of tingliness on the tongue.
A little bit of effervescence to the front, but a bit more fruit to the back of the palate.
Yep. Some like yellow wax lips on the front of the palate, which is a great little note there. I like that.
Yeah, maybe like a little bit of peach to the back.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that.
Do you get much grain on the palate?
I'm getting a spice on the palate, and my gut is telling me that it's a grain-driven spice. Like I want to believe that this is perhaps a rye or a high rye whiskey of some sort that also has a fair bit of barley in there. And I agree with you. Going back to the nose after having that initial sip, it's softened. It's become a bit easier.
Yeah.
I almost like the nose more before sipping it.
My gums are tingling.
I'm enjoying
Which makes
this.
me... I'm just trying to figure out, is it around 54%? Is it higher than that? And it's the alcohol that's manifesting as the spicy heat component? Or is it around 54, maybe even lower than that? And it is the grain and the cask that's delivering the spice component there.
The legs are really broad, and they take a while to sort of dip back into the liquid in the glass. Right?
But even returning to it on the palate, it is so viscous.
Yeah.
Even just sipping it from the glass, getting the liquid against your lips, it's so oily.
I like this a lot. A lot.
Yeah.
It's a really good sipper, but it's also interesting. I wouldn't say it's overly complex, but it's not simplistic.
I think that's well said.
Yeah, I think that's the first well said thing I've had this whole recording session.
Oh, recording session, yes. I thought you were going to go for season 8. You may have been correct. But recording session, definitely.
Everyone's a bit of a sometimes.
Yeah. All the words rhyme. All the words rhyme. Yeah. All right. Do you want to... You're saying rye with some decent barley in the mash bill. Are you willing to commit to that?
Yeah, I want to say that this is either a rye or an American single malt that's in New Charred Oak.
Well, thank you for taking my guess. We've got our two sides of the coin covered, right? So rye or rye for Joshua with some high barley, American single malt in a new char for Jason here. That's
here's what I can say. Regardless of what it is, I think it's a really well-made whiskey that is incredibly quaffable. I'm going to be pouring more as we continue this recording, and I would happily buy a bottle if I saw one on the shelf. Like, I really enjoy this.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about it's not complex, but it isn't simple. And I would say this, though. If you do not like spice in your whiskeys, this is not the whiskey for you.
No.
Because in returning to this and taking a larger, more like drinking sized draw from the glass, that spice comes roaring in on the tongue. Yeah. That pepper that you were talking to the front of the palate is right there tingling on the front of my tongue.
Yep, without a doubt. And then on the finish, there's a little bit of a slight, very slight vegetal note that when mixed with the sweetness and the slight peppery more than slight peppery quality of the whiskey, it almost reminds me of a wax pepper, which is really nice. I like that quite a lot.
Wax pepper, yeah. I think that's a good note as well.
Yep.
Okay, I have clicked. Oh, okay. Interesting. Huh.
Okay. Are we both wrong? Is this something we've had before?
I haven't even got to whether we're right or wrong. I was just looking at the bottle. Okay. Yeah, we're both wrong. However, there was a little echo of something that was said that was maybe correct, but just an echo in a very distant canyon.
Let's just start, peppers with some of the details and see if we can get to it.
All right, so let's keep the grand reveal a secret.
Okay.
Let's just start with the mash bill. The mash bill. Mm-hmm. Well, the mash bill is going to tell you something. So here we go. Let's go with their color appearance. So they said color, light maple syrup. We'd gone with the apple juice kind of thing. Aroma, sweet caramel, orange, nutty. They're suggesting cashews. Mm-hmm. Praline, and maple syrup on the nose. So our noses went in very different directions. We did have the citrus. They've got orange up there. But I think you and I there's nothing really spicy in their aroma notes there. And we really glommed onto the spice that was happening there.
Which I think on the nose was more oak driven and on the palate seemed potentially more grain driven, potentially.
Yeah, their tasting notes on the palate are toffee, dark chocolate espresso beans, creme brulee crust, always a favourite of mine, brown sugar, and barrel char. So there's a crossover and what we thought we were getting there.
The barrel char is the one note that I think my palate agrees with this day.
Mm-hmm.
Huh, that's interesting.
Yep. That's why I was using that as the point of commonality. Finish, long and balanced, leaving you with caramelized sugar and, you ready for the home run ball?
Wax pepper.
Spicy cinnamon.
Spicy cinnamon, hey! There you go.
Okay, there's then the our take. We're going to give a lot away in the our take, so I'm going to come up here. I'm going to jump in on the mash bill here. Mash bill is 80% corn, 6% wheat, 11% rye, and 3% malted barley. The strength is 57.6%.
I thought it was over 55. I did. I didn't say it aloud, but I thought it. All right.
And the age statement is 4 to 5.5. This is a sourced product from MGP. We're talking about Ford earlier in the episode. Ford was on the MGP episode with Sturzman, Ian Sturzman.
Yep.
And so this is my first ever tasting of Penelope bourbon.
This is Penelope? Yes, this is my first tasting as well.
And so for those listeners who are hearing the name Penelope for the first time, Penelope bourbon sourced from MGP and then were ultimately acquired by MGP.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, the distillery is listed as MGP. Producer is Penelope Bourbon in Roselle, New Jersey. This is barrel strength batch 10. Guessing would have been out in 21-22, given that it made it into the June 22 sample pack. Barrel strength, a significant corn mash bill. And then their take. And so remember, this take was from before Penelope were acquired by MGP. The Blind Barrel's take. One really interesting aspect of the alcohol industry is the practice of quote-unquote sourcing, as we discussed today with Devin and Chase. This means that sometimes the name on the label or the producer is not always the name of the company that makes the product. This can be done for a variety of reasons, and in the case of Penelope Bourbon, they utilise their excellent palates to take the whiskey from Midwest grain products and blend it to make something spectacular. They do it right, not hiding that they don't distill the bourbon themselves, telling it like it is. And the result is exceptional, as they take 3 different whiskies with 3 different mash bills to create this 4-grain bourbon. Blending is a real skill, and we are so happy to present this barrel proof whiskey to our subscribers. So a 4-grain bourbon.
Yeah, I am very surprised by that mash bill. So corn provides the texture. I understand that part. I think that makes good sense. But the fact that we're getting some of those cinnamon notes, and I've always attributed that to a proportion of malt, has me rethinking what I was thinking. But that it's as spicy as it is, given it's only 11% rye?
Correct. Yeah, as much as we're sitting here kind of unpacking what we thought and what we said, it remains a cracking whiskey.
That's excellent.
And I'm continuing to sip this as I'm reading back through the reveal here.
Yeah, I just poured more. I think it's excellent.
Really is tasty, and gosh, again speaks to blending. Season 8 has really been the blending season.
Yeah, right. Which brings me perfectly to my question.
Hey,
this came up in your conversation with Devin and Chase.
Okay,
and I forget which one it was. Whether it was Chase said this about Devin or Devin said this about Chase, but one of them said, or they were talking about understanding one another's palates.
Yep.
And I think
absolutely.
you and I have a pretty good understanding of one another's palates.
Yep.
And then one of them said that, well, I'll tell you, the other guy's palate has evolved. And I think that always has to happen, right? The more you taste, the more your palate evolves. And my question to you is, as blenders, right? They're blending, and you and I, we've dipped our toe into blending, and who knows, we may be blending again somewhere down the road. How do you feel about palate evolution when it comes to batched blends?
Put more leaves on those branches for me. Are we? What are we talking about here?
Here's my point. When you buy a Compass box bottling,
Yep.
or insert blended whiskey here, you've purchased that because you think that it's a cracking blend, and whatever they created fits your palate. However, people's palates evolve in different ways, and as your palate evolves, as my palate evolves, as Devin and Chase's palates evolve, I imagine that will affect the way people would put blends together, but we're on our own path while consumers are on their own path.
Sure.
And I'm just curious if you ever think about those paths deviating or not. I don't know. I was playing around with that question in my head the past few days.
Yeah. I guess my mind goes to... So when I heard your question, 2 products jumped into my head.
Okay.
Number 1 is the Compass Box Great King Street Glasgow Blend.
Mm-hmm.
And
Checks out.
the other product is the Lafroig 10 Cask Strength.
Also checks out.
And both contain Lafroig. And on that Compass Box side of things, each time I buy that bottle or each time I go to share that bottle, I am expecting somewhat very similar from experience to experience. And I think if that started to evolve, either I would want to pay attention to that journey if it interested me, or I would want to jump ship because I wasn't getting the same thing every time. And this, right, whiskey's a living product and an evolving product, and it matures in different ways, and different casks taste differently. But I think when you're trying to put out a Glasgow blend, you're looking for consistency. And maybe sometimes your components change. You're still looking for consistency there.
Yep.
When Lafroig made that move to batching the Cask Strength 10, the idea was there's going to be variety here. You're going to see different sides of the distillery here.
Yeah.
And that was exciting. Yes, that's a single malt and not a blend. But the idea, to me, remains the same. You're bringing multiple casks together, and they announced they were eschewing consistency.
Yeah.
It was going to be consistently good and consistently reliable as Lafroig 10 Cask Strength, but you might find batch variances in it if you put them side by side. Yeah. And so I think each of those is talking to a consumer who's on a particular journey. As a consumer, you get to decide whether you want to remain on that journey. The old red stripe, green canister Lafroig 10s at 57% alcohol were cracking, absolutely cracking. And I definitely miss them. They come from my halcyon days of whiskey discovery. And anytime I can get my hands on them, I thoroughly enjoy them. But there's an evolution there. There's a distillery on a journey, and you can decide whether you're going to partake in that or not. So does that begin to play around with that question?
Well, it does, and I guess my answers, my own internal answers, were somewhat similar. I wasn't thinking necessarily the Compass Box example, but I was thinking, Glenmorangie 10-year-old original, which, by the way, is becoming a 12-year-old. Susanna Skyver Barton wrote an excellent article about that, some deeper thoughts into it. But anyway, part of the reason I thought about the Glenmorangie 10-year-old original was because I'd always found it to be incredibly consistent. And I think, like you had said, there's 2 ways of looking at this. You could blend for consistency, and there are safety measurements in place to ensure that consistency, right? Samples from previous batches going back X number of years to ensure that any differences are as minuscule as can be. And then you have batched products, like you had said, with Lafroig or Aberlour or Abuna, or with our own Wolf Island Take 1 and Wolf Island Take 2. I think, there have been a number of people who I've spoken with, and I ask them about Wolf Island, and they say, oh, yeah, I got that already. And I say, oh, the Take 2? Oh, no, just the first one. Oh, well, you need to get the Take 2 because it's a totally different whiskey.
It's a batch!
We it's a batch, right? But then I started thinking about it from the standpoint of new product development and how an evolving palate can help new product development in really interesting ways. And it got me to think, maybe that's a Pollyanna way of thinking about it, that, just someone is thinking about whiskey differently and therefore they create a new whiskey. When with larger companies, it simply could be a marketing department saying, we've heard that demographic X, Y, and Z want this, and so blend to that. So maybe that's not the way to be thinking about it. But I think that there could be new product development through palate evolution, which I think is an exciting component to palate evolution.
Do you have an example from your own palate about palate evolution?
Yeah, I think I don't know if this is an older example that I've brought up previously, but I can't think of any newer one. But I remember when you and I first met, and we were discussing Lechig, right? And I had an early bottling of Lechig, and you didn't even have to say the words; they just came to my head. It was cat piss. Like it wasn't great. It made no sense to my palate. And then as time went on, and I experienced more Lechigs, I understood that. So it was a matter of maybe not necessarily or maybe it's a form of evolution, right? It's my palate helping to create context within my own brain to understand what I'm tasting.
Well, I would also say the distillery evolved.
So you think that's a part too? Yeah.
To actually get the cat piss out of the flavor profile.
So what you're saying is that the whiskey wasn't always great. It had just gotten great to your palate. Oh, okay. Correct. Yeah. I think, I think an example for me could be some of the Ben Nevises, right? Where you were championing Ben Nevis. Yeah.
And that kind of funky, dank note wasn't really my vibe.
Yeah.
I believe the kids are saying. And
Low-key.
to me, that's anybody older than 40 years old. And so kind of learning the place of that dankness. As I'm talking about this, I'm now thinking on mezcal, right? And thinking about all the times, so many times you and I in Chicago, talking about, Dan Gryson from earlier today and Ford Ray when he used to be there. Tom Jadelka. Is Tom Jadelka a Chicago guy?
Man, I don't know.
Yeah,
let's say yes.
Incomplete list. Incomplete list.
Yeah.
But just talking about Chicago like we are today, and I remember sitting in Chicago with you and actually Ian McCallum, and you had a mezcal cocktail, and it smelled to me like hangovers and poor decisions.
Yes, those were your exact words. It smells like hangovers and poor decisions.
I remember that moment like crystal clear. And then again, kind of coming around to that, it's not quite a dankness in mezcal, but it is a heavy note there.
Heavy vegetal.
Right. Yeah. And it can be the type of note that lingers long into the next day when you're lying on your couch, wondering how you're going to survive the day. And that becoming a very positive note for me. So I guess there's a couple of points of evolution I can think of there with my own palate. And now, loving Ben Nevis and, checking out and going looking for Ben Nevis and mezcal, going bananas for mezcal. Yeah. So, a couple of good points of evolution there as well.
There you go. Oh, beauty. This has been a load of fun. I wasn't lying when I said I poured some more blind barrels. Look how much is left.
Just finished my second. I'm showing Joshua my empty glass.
And I'm going to empty this little sample bottle because this is great. Yep. So what was this? Penelope batch 10?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. If you see bottles out in the wild, grab them. I know I'm going to grab a bottle.
Yeah, and let me say thank you to our friends at Blind Barrels for sending that over. You can find them blindbarrels.com. And then also we talked today, and we talked in the interview about their website. But if you want to check out what Devin and Chase are up to, you'll find them at mash, letter N, grain.com. Mashgrain.com. So yeah, give them a follow as well. See what they're up to.
There you go. Well, Jason, thank you again for taking the helm down in Austin, Texas, to talking with Devin and with Chase, with Irene, with Daniel Whittington.
Indeed.
And also, running those two events, the one with Drammers, and then, of course, with our friends at Austin Scotch Club as well.
Two terrific events as well. Really well attended, well populated, knowledgeable, thoughtful whiskey drinkers. Yeah, Austin was an absolute home run. Looking forward to getting back there.
Yeah, hopefully I'll get there one of these days.
You'll enjoy it.
There you go. All right, well, Jason, I raise my glass to you, to the listeners, to our guests, to Nation members, to Dan Greisen, to Tom Judelka, to the Ice Cream Man, to life, L'chaim.
I raise my empty glass to all of the above. Well done, Penelope.
Especially on Christmas Day. Just really big presents. Oh, presents, not presents. Yeah, I'll edit that joke out. It's fucking terrible.